January 31st. God's answer to Job and his so-called friends is followed by unprecedented blessings. Job's fortunes are restored twofold, and he's given another 140 years, literally 2 more lifetimes, to enjoy them. Job's restoration is glorious. But to the modern reader, it begs the question, why would God allow all of this suffering? We're given a clue by looking at another question. Why would the Scriptures devote so much of its content to one story? The book of Job took 13 days for us to cover, while the previous 13 days covered over 300 years of biblical history. This seems like a disproportionate amount of time to devote to a story of one man's suffering, doesn't it? Well, as we mentioned at the beginning of the book of Job, some scholars believe that Job offers an Old Testament type of Christ, that Job's story actually telegraphs a very important aspect of the incarnate Christ. In some ways, Job's unimaginable torment and suffering, for no fault of his own, that was completely orchestrated by God, parallels the agony of Jesus, what he had to endure to achieve his ultimate relief, mankind's redemption. It may be that God had a deeper purpose in allowing Job to suffer, to highlight for all humanity the suffering, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, that Jesus would experience in order to ransom the human race. This puts the suffering that Job experienced in a very different framework. As for God's treatment of Job personally, here's a thought. If you could fast forward a few decades, 40 or 50 or even 100 years after Job's restoration, you would undoubtedly find that the memories of his suffering had faded a considerable degree. Job, his family, his friends, and his neighbors saw the blessings of his later life far exceed the blessings of his earlier life. No doubt, Job would also consider the reality of those later blessings in his later years every bit as potent and vivid as the brief and temporary sufferings he had endured in our readings. The New Testament appears to offer support for this idea in James chapter 5, verse 11. Behold, we call them blessed who endured. You have heard of the perseverance of Job, and have seen the Lord in the outcome, and how the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. From Job's life, we see that the Lord will allow the disruption of our lives, that He will interrupt our agendas and inconvenience us if needed, to show us His love and mercy. Ultimately, saying a deeper yes to God's will for our lives requires that we trust that He knows what He's doing. Here's today's application. Do you really believe that God knows what He's doing? Do your decisions demonstrate that belief? Reflect on this thought today. Determine if He's calling you to a deeper level of trust in Him. And here's today's prayer.